Have you ever knocked on the door of someone you love, knowing they're inside but they never opened it? You stand there waiting, hoping, only to feel that quiet sting of being ignored. Now imagine that door isn't just a piece of wood, it's your child's heart. And for reasons you can't quite understand, it feels like you're standing on the outside of their life, no longer welcome in the same way you once were. If that image feels familiar, you're not alone. So many parents, especially in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, have given their whole lives to raising children, only to find themselves treated as background noise. Maybe the calls have become rare, the visits shorter, the conversations colder. And the worst part isn't just the silence. It's the feeling that you no longer matter. Let's be honest. This kind of pain doesn't just bruise the heart. It cuts into your sense of identity. Because for decades your title was mom or dad. You were the problem solver, the caretaker, the rock. And now it's like you faded into the wallpaper of their busy lives. They've moved on and left you wondering where you fit. But here's something few people will tell you, and it might sting a little. The more you chase after respect, the more it slips through your fingers. The louder you ask to be seen, the more invisible you become. And if your days are filled with anger, sadness, or waiting for them to do better, then slowly, without realizing it, you've handed your peace over to people who aren't even looking. This video isn't about blaming them. And it's certainly not about making you feel guilty for caring. It's about something much deeper, your dignity. Because you haven't lost it. You've just stopped protecting it. It's time to change that. You see, respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you inspire. Think about that word for a moment. Inspire. It means to breathe life into something. And for too long, you've been holding your breath, hoping they'll finally appreciate you. But they won't. Not while you keep making yourself smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. You might be thinking, but I sacrificed everything for them. I never asked for much. Why can't they see that? And the answer is simple, though not easy. They saw your sacrifices, but they mistook them for endless availability. You were always there, always helping, always saying yes. And like anything that becomes routine, it stopped being appreciated. Imagine an old wooden chair that sat in the corner of a house for years. It once held everyone. It supported every moment, from family gatherings to quiet evenings. But after a while, people stopped noticing it. They threw jackets on it, dropped bags without a thought, until one day it cracked, and no one noticed it was gone. That's what happens when your presence is constant and your boundaries are invisible. You don't get valued. You get overlooked. But here's the good news. You're not a chair. You're not stuck in the corner. You still have the power to move, to stand tall again, to rebuild the way they see you, starting with the way you see yourself. Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one. The same goes for dignity. Don't beg for it. Don't struggle to prove it. Just live it. The day you begin to truly respect yourself is the day your children will start to see you differently. That doesn't mean shutting them out. It doesn't mean becoming cold or spiteful. It means practicing something I call strategic presence. You stop waiting for the phone to ring. You stop dropping everything when they call at the last minute. You start choosing how to spend your time, not based on their needs, but your peace. And when they do reach out, because yes, they will, let it be because they want to share something with you, not just take something from you. When you speak, let your words carry weight, not desperation. When you make plans, let them be rooted in self-respect, not guilt. Because here's the truth that might feel uncomfortable, but it will set you free. If someone knows they can ignore you without consequence, they will. Not because they're bad people, but because life pulls everyone in 100 directions, and what doesn't stand firm gets overlooked. So, how do you begin standing firm again? You start by asking yourself this: why have I given them so much power over how I feel? Why does my whole day rise or fall based on whether they text me back or remember my birthday or invite me over? That's not love. That's emotional dependence. The root of suffering often comes from trying to control what's beyond our reach. You can't control how your children behave. You can't control how they see you. But you can control how you respond. And in that response lies your freedom. From now on, every time you feel that wave of sadness from being ignored, remember this: don't suffer imagined troubles. Their silence is not your failure. It's a reflection of where they are, not who you are. Let that sink in. You don't need to keep proving your worth. You don't need to replay every conversation wondering what went wrong. What you need is to come back home, to yourself, to the part of you that remembers your own strength. The version of you that raised a family, held it together through chaos, and is still standing, even when others drift away. You are not weak for wanting connection, but you become vulnerable when you let that longing erase your own value. And that's what we're changing starting now. This is the moment you start reclaiming your dignity, not by demanding respect from your children, but by becoming someone who naturally commands it. And once you've done that, the next step is to let go of the invisible chains that have been holding you back for far too long. You've already begun the most important journey, the one back to yourself. And now it's time to face something even more subtle, but just as heavy: the quiet emotional chain that keeps you tied to their attention. Not their love, but the hope of it. That silent waiting. The checking of your phone more than you'd like to admit. The way your heart lifts at the smallest gesture and crashes again when nothing comes. This isn't just hurt. This is dependence. And emotional dependence is one of the hardest things to recognize in ourselves, especially as parents. Because love was supposed to mean selflessness. You were taught that being a good father or mother meant giving and giving, even when nothing came back. But here's the catch. When you keep giving without boundaries, your children don't always see love. They see something they can use, and that changes how they treat you. It's not that they're cruel. Most adult children don't even realize what they're doing. But the truth is, if every time they call, you drop everything. If every time they ignore you, you come back with more kindness. If every time they fall short, you lower your expectations just to keep the peace, then they learn that your love requires nothing. Not even basic decency. And that's not love. That's invisibility. You don't have to live like that. You don't need to sit by the window waiting for something you can't control. Step outside and take ownership of your reality. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. Start noticing the small ways you give your peace away. That flash of disappointment when you don't get a response. The way your mood dips after being overlooked. That tiny voice that says, "Maybe they just forgot," followed by another that whispers, "Maybe you just don't matter anymore." Don't let those thoughts run unchecked. Don't let them define you. Observe them like clouds passing by. And remind yourself, I am not a hostage to anyone's behavior. Because here's the real danger. The more you wait, the more your life gets smaller. Your world shrinks to the size of their attention. And slowly, without meaning to, you stop living. That's not aging. That's disappearing. But you still have a choice. Imagine this. Instead of waiting for a call, you take a walk in the morning, not to kill time, but because it brings you peace. Instead of hoping to be invited somewhere, you make plans with someone who sees you, even if it's just a neighbor or someone new at the community center. Instead of letting their absence define your worth, you let your presence define your day. That is power. That is dignity. That is the beginning of freedom. It may feel uncomfortable at first. You've spent decades caring for others, thinking of their needs first. But now it's your turn. Not to become selfish, but to become whole. When you begin to fill your own cup, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, others will see you differently. Not as someone they should check in on out of duty, but someone whose time and energy matter. And they'll start to feel that loss when you're not available at their convenience. Not because you vanished, but because you shifted. So much of the pain you feel doesn't come from what actually happened, but from the stories you keep replaying in your mind. The what-ifs, the could-have-beens. But those stories aren't your future. They're just echoes. It's time to stop reliving them and start writing new pages. When your children realize you're no longer orbiting their lives like a forgotten moon, they may start to wonder, where did you go? Why are you no longer so quick to say yes? And more importantly, what are you doing instead? You don't need to answer those questions with words. You'll answer them with the quiet shift in your energy, with your steady calm, with your new priorities. Because people notice when something they took for granted stops reaching out. That's not a game. That's not punishment. That's reality. Think about someone in your past, a friend or a loved one, who was always around, always dependable. Maybe you didn't call them for a while. Maybe you assumed they'd always be there. But then one day they stopped. Not because they were angry, but because they had grown. And when you looked up and they were gone, something inside you stirred. That's what happens when presence turns into absence with dignity. But here's the key. It only works when it's real. If you pretend to let go, but inside you're still clinging to hope. If you withdraw on the outside, but still burn with resentment, they will feel it. And your energy will betray you. True freedom comes when you no longer need them to be okay. When you're no longer waiting for them to change, to apologize, or to come back. And when that happens, something powerful begins to shift. Not just in them, but in you. You begin to see that the life you've been postponing, the hobbies you let go of, the friendships you neglected, the dreams you shelved, are still waiting. And they don't care how old you are. They just need you to show up. Oh, you are not done yet. You are not too old to be curious, too late to be bold, or too broken to begin again. Your time isn't over. It's simply been hijacked by a pattern that no longer serves you. Now you're beginning to break free from that. You're no longer living on borrowed emotion. You're starting to breathe for yourself again. And the next breath you take will be the one where you learn that the quietest voice in the room, the one that speaks with calm, with boundaries, with clarity, is the one that gets heard. You're here now, still breathing, still capable, and most importantly, still holding the pen to write the next chapter of your life. Not based on what they do, but on who you choose to be. But there's something we haven't touched yet. Something quiet, but powerful. Guilt. It creeps in when you try to change. It whispers when you say no. It shows up every time you try to create space, and it says, you're abandoning them. You're being selfish. You weren't perfect, remember? Maybe this is your fault, and I want you to pause. Breathe. Because guilt, that heavy, familiar weight, is not a sign of love. It's a chain. A chain that's been wrapped around your heart for years. You might be thinking, but I yelled when I shouldn't have. I wasn't always patient. I made mistakes. Of course you did. Every parent does. There is no such thing as perfect parenting. Only people doing the best they could with what they had at the time. The fact that you're reflecting on your past means you care deeply. But caring isn't the same as carrying. Carrying guilt for decades doesn't make you a better parent. It makes you a prisoner to a version of yourself that no longer exists. It's been said that we are more often frightened than hurt, and that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And that's true. The story of your guilt, The one you've replayed 1,000 times might be hurting you more than the reality ever did. And worst of all, others can use that guilt against you, even unconsciously. A subtle comment from your child, a memory twisted, a sigh when you try to say no, and suddenly you're right back where you were, apologizing, bending, giving in, even when it doesn't feel right. But today, I want you to realize something. You've done enough apologizing. You've spent years trying to love them well. And if they are grown now and still see you only through the lens of your worst moments, then their perspective is incomplete. It's not your job to convince them otherwise. It's your job to stop letting guilt steal your peace. Because guilt will always keep you saying yes. It will keep you showing up even when your body says rest. It will keep you giving until you're empty, all in the name of redemption that no one is really asking for. But you don't need redemption. You need release. Release from the old stories. From the pressure to earn love you already gave. From the belief that your worth is tied to how well you perform as a parent, even long after your parenting days have ended. You've earned the right to protect your energy, to have peace, to enjoy your time without justifying it. And that means learning one of the most powerful tools of emotional freedom: how to say no, without guilt and without fear. Let's be honest. You've said yes too many times. You've picked up calls that only asked for favors, not your well-being. You've loaned money you knew would never come back. You've babysat, cooked, cleaned, and listened, often without a single thank you. And you did it hoping, maybe not out loud but deep down, that one day they'd see your sacrifice and offer something real in return. But instead, what you often get is distance, entitlement, or worse, silence. So now, when the next request comes, when your body says no but your guilt says yes, I want you to pause and ask yourself, am I doing this out of love or out of fear? Because love can say no. Love respects limits. Love doesn't abandon itself to stay connected. Saying no is not rejection. It's self-respect. It's saying, I matter too. Think of an old tree, solid, rooted, graceful. It's weathered storms. It's given shade. It's stood for generations. But if that tree bends with every gust of wind, it starts to lose its shape. You are that tree. And your no is not harshness. It's strength. It's structure. It's the boundary that holds your dignity in place. So the next time they ask for something you can't give, you don't need to over-explain. You don't need to list your aches or your schedule or your fatigue. You can simply say with calm, no, not this time, and then hold your silence. They may push back. They may act surprised. But something will shift. They will see that you have limits now, that your yes means something, because you're no longer handing it out for free. And slowly, they will start to see you not as a convenience, but as a person with needs, with boundaries, with a life. And speaking of life, how much of it have you postponed? How many hobbies have you shelved because you were too busy being useful? How many walks have you skipped waiting for their call? How many days have blurred together because your focus was always on their needs, not your own joy? It's time to reclaim that. Not by demanding attention, not by waiting for their approval, but by building a life that doesn't depend on them at all. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a day that's just yours, not shaped by messages or guilt or expectations. A day where you wake up with purpose, move your body because it feels good, eat something nourishing, laugh with someone who actually listens, and go to bed proud of how you spent your time. That life is not a fantasy. It's yours to claim. And when your children eventually look up and see you thriving, when they see you no longer orbiting them like a forgotten moon, it might just awaken something in them. Not guilt, not pity, but respect. And that's where the healing begins. Not in chasing them, but in living well without them. Because the final truth is this: they may come back, or they may not. They may wake up to your worth, or they may never see it. But that doesn't get to decide your joy. Only you do. And the moment you realize that, you stop surviving, and you start living. You've come a long way. Maybe not physically. You're still sitting in the same chair, listening, thinking. But emotionally, you've moved miles. And now there's just one more thing left to do. You must stop waiting. Not just for a call or a visit or some overdue recognition. You must stop waiting for your life to begin again once they change. Because the truth is, they might not. Time doesn't stop moving. And the longer you delay your own joy, the more of it slips quietly through your fingers. One season becomes the next. One year fades into another. And all the while, you're still holding space for a future that depends on someone else waking up. But what if they never do? Will you have spent the last chapters of your story standing at a door that never opens? Will you keep checking your phone, measuring your worth by every silence? Or will you turn away from that closed door and walk toward the light? That's the final step, the most liberating one. You stop centering your life around the people who no longer center you, not out of bitterness, not out of pride, but out of deep, unshakable wisdom. You begin to live fully, without them. And here's the paradox. It's when you stop needing them that they begin to notice your absence. Not as a manipulation, not as a test, but as a quiet, undeniable truth. You're no longer waiting. That is the silent revenge of success. Not success in the world's eyes, money or status or titles, but the success of peace, of self-possession, of a morning where you smile at your reflection, of a day spent with purpose, of laughter that no longer needs an audience to feel real. When they see that you're happy without them, not pretending, but genuinely, something changes. They begin to wonder, not because you told them off, but because your life became something they're no longer invited to by default. That absence, it speaks, it echoes, it stirs something they hadn't felt before. The loss of your energy, your attention, your unconditional availability. And it's in that moment that you become magnetic again, not by effort, but by elevation. But remember, this isn't a performance. If you build a life just to prove a point, it will collapse the moment they return. You'll start bending again, adjusting again, waiting again. No. The only life worth building is the one that's truly yours, whether they ever come back or not. And I want to say something clearly, especially to you who are watching this after 60, after 70, maybe even after 80. It is not too late. Whoever told you that your best days are behind you was wrong. You are not done loving, not done laughing, not done discovering who you are outside of the roles you once played. You were a parent. You are a parent. But that is not the only thing you are. You are still becoming. So now I ask you to choose. Not out of emotion, not out of anger, but out of a quiet promise to yourself. Choose to stop explaining your pain to people who won't hear it. Choose to stop offering your time to people who only take. Choose to stop anchoring your happiness to someone else's change. Instead, choose peace. Choose boundaries. Choose the stillness of a heart that no longer begs. Choose mornings that begin with a breath of freedom, not a sigh of regret. Because the only true revenge is a life so full, so calm, so rooted, that those who once overlooked you can't help but stop and stare. And when they do, it won't be your silence that shames them. It will be your strength. But here's what matters most. Even if they never look back, you still win. Because you'll have lived. Truly lived. On your own terms. not out of spite, but out of wisdom. They say the best revenge is to be nothing like those who wronged you. And maybe today, that means becoming unlike the version of yourself who kept waiting. So don't go back. Don't shrink again just to keep the peace. Don't quiet your spirit just to feel needed. Stand tall, quietly, confidently. And if you ever doubt yourself again, I want you to come back to this truth. My peace doesn't depend on anyone. Say it with me. My peace doesn't depend on anyone. Now go live like it's true. Because you're not too old to start again. You're just in the perfect season to begin. And the dignity you thought was lost, it was always inside you. You just stopped protecting it. But not anymore. Now, it's yours again. And no one can take it from you. Not ever.